She is on her knees in chains. The sword is already raised. The crowd is already waiting. And the most feared king in the wolf territories is about to end her life for a crime she did not commit. But before the blade falls, a 6-year-old girl pushes past 4 armed soldiers, raises one small finger, and points directly at the Alpha King. "Mom said you once loved her." The sword slips from his hand. The entire execution yard goes silent, and nothing will ever be the same again. This is the story of Catherine Fane, a woman who once saved the life of the man now trying to end hers, and the daughter who carried a secret that could either destroy a kingdom or rebuild one. Stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The stone beneath my knees is cold enough to burn. That is the first thing I notice. Not the crowd pressing against the iron barriers on every side. Not the guards standing so close I can hear them breathing. Not the weight of the chains locked around my wrists, heavy enough that my arms stopped feeling like mine an hour ago. Just the cold, seeping up through the stone, through bone, settling somewhere deep in my chest where fear used to live before I ran out of it. The execution yard of the royal fortress smells like iron and pine smoke, and the particular stillness that only gathers when a large group of people are waiting for someone to die. Today, that someone is me, Catherine Fane, Northern Territory, accused of treason and aiding rebel forces against the crown. The charge had been read aloud twice, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. The crowd rippled, murmured, then settled back into silence, that awful, patient silence of people who have already decided how this ends. A guard's fist closes in my hair without warning, wrenching my face upward. "You will look at your king when he delivers judgment." I look up, not because he told me to, because I need to see his face. Ernest Trojan stands 10 feet away, broad-shouldered, immovable, dark hair pushed back from a face that could have been carved from the northern cliffs themselves, sharp jaw, hard mouth, the kind of stillness that powerful men wear like armor. He is dressed for ceremony. The silver wolf sigil gleams across his chest. The sword in his right hand is already drawn, already blood-stained, held loose at his side like a man who has done this before and found it unremarkable. His eyes are silver gray. I know those eyes. I have spent 5 years trying to forget them. This is the man who burned my village. The thought arrives flat and certain, the way truths do when you have lived inside them long enough that they stop cutting and simply become fact. He stood in the fire that night, and his wolf moved through the streets like a force of nature, unstoppable, feral, leaving nothing standing that had been standing before. My mother, my neighbors, the only life I had ever known, all of it ash, and he does not even remember my face. That last part, that is what hardens me. That is what straightens my spine against the weight of the chains and locks my jaw against the trembling that wants to start in my hands and doesn't get to. I do not bow. I do not beg. I stare directly back at the man who ruined my life, and I give him nothing. Not one tear. Not one flinch. The crowd shifts. A woman near the front whispers something sharp to the man beside her. They expected the performance, probably. The pleading. A prisoner breaking under the theater of royal justice. They will not get it from me. My eyes move once, just for a single breath, to the far left edge of the crowd. Carrie. She is standing exactly where I told her not to stand. Pressed between 2 strangers, near the iron barrier, her small face pale and too still for a 6-year-old. She is clutching the worn stuffed rabbit she has carried since she was 2 years old, both arms wrapped tight around it like it is the only solid thing in the world. Her eyes find mine across the yard. Silver gray eyes. His eyes, though no one in this courtyard understands that yet. Don't, I tell her silently, willing every word across the distance between us. Stay there. Stay still. Do not move. Whatever happens next, do not move. She gives me the look she always gives me when I tell her to do something she has already decided not to do. My chest cracks quietly. Somewhere behind my ribs, in a place no one can see. The royal herald steps forward, unrolls the proclamation with practiced ceremony, clears his throat. By order of His Majesty, Alpha King Ernest Trojan, the sentence is death, to be carried out immediately in the presence of the assembled packs, as a warning to all who would betray the crown. The crowd doesn't murmur this time. They just watch. Ernest Trojan raises a sword. The yard falls into the specific silence of held breath. Hundreds of people, one collective pause. The whole world narrowing down to the arc of a blade catching pale morning light. I close my eyes. I think, I saved your life once. 5 years ago, in the dark, in the fire. I pressed my hand to your chest, and I sang the old words my mother taught me, and I pulled your wolf back from the edge of something it could not have come back from alone. You would have died that night without me, and you never knew it was me. You still don't. The sword reaches its highest point, poised, certain, final, and then a voice, small, clear, cutting through the silence of the entire yard like it was made of nothing more than paper. Mom said you once loved her. The sword does not fall. The blade never reached me. One moment it was above my head, catching the pale morning light, angled for the killing stroke, and in the next it was on the ground, ringing against stone. The sound rolled across every wall of the execution yard like a struck bell, bouncing off iron barriers and torchlit columns until it faded into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. No one moved. No one breathed. Ernest Trojan stood over me with empty hands and an expression I had never seen on the face of a king. Not rage, not command, not the cold, practiced certainty of a man delivering justice. Raw and unguarded, and for just one fractured second, almost desperate. Like a man who has just heard a word in a language he was certain he had forgotten, and cannot explain why his body remembers it anyway. I did not move from my knees. I did not let myself look at Carrie. If I looked at her, something in my face would give it all away. And I had survived 5 years of silence by learning, the hard way, that composure is the only weapon left to a woman in chains. So I kept my eyes on the king, and I watched him come apart at the edges. Carrie had stopped just short of where I knelt. She was still pointing, that small arm raised, extended, her finger aimed directly at the center of honest Trojan's chest, steady and certain as a compass needle locking onto north. Her worn rabbit hung from her other hand, dragging slightly against the stone. Her dress was too thin for the morning cold. I had told the village woman to keep her inside, keep her warm, keep her away from this yard. Carrie had, as always, made her own decision about that. She was 6 years old, auburn-haired and fearless, with those wide silver-gray eyes that had made strangers pause and stare her whole life. People in the Northern Territories always said her eyes were unusual. Unsettling, some said. The color of a storm front. The color of old wolf blood. I had always known exactly whose eyes they were. I had just never expected to be kneeling in front of him when the resemblance finally became impossible to ignore. Honest Trojan was staring at my daughter. Not with anger. Not with the suspicion a king reserves for disruptions to his ceremonies. With something older. Something that moved behind his silver-gray eyes like a current running beneath still water, slow and deep and deeply unwilling to surface. The wordless, boneless kind. The kind that bypasses the mind entirely and lands somewhere in the body first. Carrie tilted her head. She does that when she is studying something, when she is deciding whether a thing deserves more of her attention or less. She has done it since she was old enough to look at the world with opinions about it. She decided Ernest Trojan deserved more. "You promised," she said. Her voice carried the way children's voices always do in open spaces, clean and unself-conscious, with no idea that the entire assembled court of the Northern Wolf Kingdoms was currently holding its breath around her. "Mom said you promised you'd come back." The sound that moved through the crowd was not quite a gasp and not quite silence. Something in between. The sound of hundreds of people recalibrating what they thought they were watching. I felt the moment land in Ernest Trojan's body before I saw it on his face. His right hand lifted, slowly, without intention, the way a hand moves when the mind is somewhere else entirely, following an old instruction, a buried reflex, something laid down so deep that conscious thought never gets a vote in it. His palm pressed flat against his chest, against the left side, below the collarbone, against the scar. I knew it was there. I had put my hand in that exact place 5 years ago, in the burning dark of my village, when his wolf had gone feral, and the only thing standing between him and an unraveling he couldn't come back from was me and an old song and whatever was left of my courage. I carried the mirror of that scar on my own collarbone. I had traced it in the dark more nights than I could count, wondering if he ever noticed his, wondering if some part of him ever felt the echo of it and didn't know what to call the feeling. Watching his hand press against it now, unconscious, unguarded, in front of his entire court, I had my answer. 2 guards broke from formation, moving toward Carrie with the automatic efficiency of men trained to neutralize disruptions without being asked. One reached for her shoulder. "Stop!" Honest Trojan's voice. Not raised, not performed, just absolute. The single word landed in the yard like something dropped from a great height, and both guards went still mid-step, as though the air itself had thickened around them. The Alpha King did not look at them when he said it. He was still looking at Carrie. And then, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a man disarming something he does not fully understand, he lowered himself. Not all the way, just enough, just until his silver-gray eyes were level with my daughter's silver-gray eyes. The resemblance, at that distance, in that light, was no longer something a person could talk themselves out of. I watched it register on the faces of the guards nearest to him, watched the calculation shift behind their eyes, the slow, dangerous arithmetic of men beginning to understand that what they were witnessing was not an interruption to the execution. It was the execution, just not the one that had been planned. Honest Trojan looked at my daughter for a long, unreadable moment. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since they dragged me into this yard, for the first time since he raised that sword above my head with all the certainty of a man who has never once questioned his own judgment, he looked uncertain, not weak, not broken, just uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of a version of his own past he was not prepared to discover still existed. The sword was still on the ground between us. No one had moved to pick it up. The sword was still on the ground. Nobody moved to pick it up. Nobody spoke. The entire yard remained locked in that suspended moment, guards frozen mid-step, court officials exchanging glances above their ceremonial collars, the crowd pressed breathless against the iron barriers. All of them watching the Alpha King crouch before a 6-year-old girl like the rest of us had simply stopped existing. He wouldn't stop staring at her. Not with cruelty, not with the calculating assessment of a king measuring a threat. Ernest Trojan stared at my daughter the way a man stares at something that shouldn't exist, like his mind was presenting him with an answer to a question he hadn't known he'd been asking. Carrie stared back, unbothered, curious. She has always been braver than she should be. I watched the exact moment he saw it, the slight stillness that moved through his body, subtle enough that only someone watching closely would catch it. His jaw tightened. Something shifted behind those silver-gray eyes. Because he was looking into a mirror that was 6 years old and had auburn hair and absolutely no idea what it was doing to him. His gaze moved from Carrie to me. Slowly, deliberately. It dropped to my collarbone, to the scar sitting just below it, pale and permanent, shaped like something that had once been torn rather than cut. I watched recognition flicker across his face. Incomplete, fragmented, the way a dream feels when you reach for it in the morning and catch only edges. His hand moved toward his chest again, stopped. "Your Majesty!" The voice came from the right side of the royal platform. Smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man who has never needed to raise it to be obeyed. Lord Varric stepped forward, sharp-featured, silver-templed, dressed impeccably in court black. His expression was pleasant in the particular way that very dangerous things sometimes are. "Justice requires completion," he said. "The packs are watching." Honest didn't respond immediately. That silence, that single, public hesitation, rippled through the yard like a stone through water. "The execution," Ernest said finally, his voice low and absolute, "is delayed." The courtyard erupted, and Varric smiled. That smile frightened me more than the sword ever had. The courtyard didn't stay erupted for long. One look from Ernest Trojan, sharp, sweeping, absolute, and the noise collapsed back into uneasy silence. Guards straightened. Officials pressed their mouths shut. The crowd pulled back from the barriers like a tide retreating from a shore it had overstepped. Only Varric remained unmoved, still smiling, patient in the way that predators are patient, not because they are calm, but because they are certain. I filed that smile away somewhere cold and kept my face empty. Ernest turned from the crowd. Not a retreat. Kings don't retreat. A withdrawal. 2 steps back from the yard's center, one hand pressed briefly to his temple, his jaw working around something he couldn't seem to swallow. The memory was hitting him. I could see it. I recognized the look. I had worn it myself for 5 years. Fire. His wolf, massive and silver, moving through thornwood like the storm had taken a shape and given it teeth. Every person still breathing, running, or hiding, or already beyond running. The beast tearing through smoke without direction, without control. Just rage and ruin, and something ancient underneath both. And then me, standing in the middle of it. I don't know why I stopped running. Maybe it was the healer's instinct my mother spent years pressing into me. Maybe something in my wolf recognized something in his before my mind caught up. I stepped in front of him, pressed my hand flat against his chest and sang. The old words, the calming tongue, the ones my mother said could reach a wolf when nothing else could. He could have killed me. He didn't. Carrie's small voice cut through everything. "Mama used to sing at night," she told Ernest, matter-of-factly, still clutching her rabbit. Old words. She said they kept the dark away. Ernest went completely still. His silver-gray eyes found mine across the yard, and in them, finally, painfully, irreversibly, something unlocked. She didn't betray me. She saved me. The yard hadn't recovered from his silence. That unlocked expression on honest Trojan's face lasted only a second before the king pulled it back behind walls thick enough to hold an army. But the court had seen it. The guards had seen it. Varric, standing perfectly still on the platform with that careful smile, had most certainly seen it. And Carrie, oblivious to all of it, chose that exact moment to keep talking. "Mama said the king made a promise," she announced. Conversational, easy, the tone she uses when she is sharing something she has known so long it stopped feeling like a secret. She said he promised he'd come back, that he just forgot. Carrie. Her name hit the inside of my chest like a fist. "Stop. Please stop." But she was already continuing. "I used to ask her which king." Carrie tilted her head at Ernest with that slow, considering look of hers. She never said, but she got sad every time. The same sad as when she sings the night words. I watched Ernest Trojan do the mathematics. I watched it move behind his eyes, quiet and devastating and completely beyond my ability to stop. 6 years old. Thornwood. The night his wolf lost control and a woman stepped into the fire and sang him back from the edge of something irreversible. 9 months. 6 years. His wolf reacted before his face did. Something shifted in his posture, subtle, primal, the unconscious repositioning of a predator placing himself between a threat and something he has decided to protect. He stepped closer. "Carrie!" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Come here. Now." She looked at me, then at him, then back at me, with those silver-gray eyes that had always been the most beautiful and most dangerous thing about her. The crowd had gone very, very quiet. Not the silence of an execution. Something else entirely. Ernest Trojan looked at my daughter, really looked, and I watched the possibility land in him like an arrow finding the place it was always meant to go. I had survived the sword. I wasn't sure I would survive this. Ernest Trojan didn't look away from Carrie for a long moment. Then something hardened in his face, not coldness, but purpose, and he straightened to his full height and turned toward the royal herald with the controlled precision of a man redirecting something dangerous before it could detonate. "The charges," he said. "Read them again. Every detail." The herald blinked. "Your Majesty, the sentence has already—" Again. The herald read them again. I listened this time not with fear, but with the particular attention of someone hearing a story they know is wrong and searching for where exactly the lie was inserted. It didn't take long. The evidence was thin in the way that fabricated things are thin, constructed to withstand a quick glance, not a direct one. Witness testimonies with no names attached. A rebel correspondence letter with no seal, no date, no verifiable origin. Charges approved and processed with unusual speed, bypassing the standard review period entirely. Ernest's jaw tightened incrementally with each item. A guard, young, positioned just behind Ernest's left shoulder, leaned forward and said something low and careful directly into the king's ear. Ernest's eyes cut sideways. Brief. Sharp. I caught 2 words from where I knelt. "Not yours. The execution order." Not his. I had suspected it for weeks, in the quiet hours when Carrie was sleeping, and fear has nothing to occupy itself with but the truth. I had just never been certain until I watched the realization move through Ernest Trojan's body like a cold current. He knew whose it was. We both did. Varric had already taken 2 steps forward before Ernest turned around. Smooth, unhurried. His guards, I noticed now, had quietly repositioned themselves. Not around the king. Around me and Carrie. Not protection. Containment. "The pacts require resolution, Your Majesty," Varric said pleasantly. "Delay breeds doubt. This was never about treason. It was about silence. Mine and Carrie's, permanent and irrevocable and disguised as justice." Ernest Trojan walked toward me, not with the measured authority of a king crossing his own execution yard, with something rawer than that, something his wolf was pulling him into whether his mind had agreed or not. Varric said something sharp behind him. Ernest didn't stop. The guards along the perimeter shifted uneasily. Court officials exchanged the kind of glances that mean this has stopped following the script. I stayed on my knees because the chains didn't give me another option, and I watched him close the distance between us with my heart slamming against my ribs and my face giving away nothing. He crouched in front of me, close enough that I could see the scar, just visible above his collar, pale and permanent, sitting in the exact place my hand had pressed 5 years ago in the dark and the fire and the desperate calculus of a woman with nothing left to lose. Something moved through my chest the moment he got that close. I hated it immediately. That pull, deep and wordless and devastatingly familiar, like a key turning in a lock I had spent years pretending didn't exist. My wolf knew him, had always known him, had been quietly insisting on it since the night at Thornwood while I spent 5 years building walls tall enough to drown the knowing out. A mate bond doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about burned villages or 5 years of silence or the chains currently cutting into your wrists. It simply is. "You destroyed everything I had," I said quietly, "just for him, and my wolf still knows your name. Do you have any idea what that costs a person?" Ernest flinched. Small. Real. "Mama!" Carrie had drifted close again, her rabbit clutched tight. She looked between us with those silver-gray eyes, his eyes, my daughter's eyes, and asked the question with the devastating simplicity only a child could manage. "Are you my father?" The yard disappeared. Every charge, every guard, every carefully constructed live Varric had built around this morning, all of it fell away. Ernest Trojan looked at Carrie, then at me. His wolf went still for the first time all morning. Not suppressed, not controlled, settled. The truth didn't need a proclamation. It just needed a 6-year-old girl with her father's eyes to say the thing out loud that the rest of us had been too afraid to. Varric moved the moment Carrie said the word father. Not with surprise, not with the stumbling reaction of a man caught off guard. With the smooth, pre-planned efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had already decided what came after it. "The Alpha King," he announced, his voice carrying across every corner of the yard, "has demonstrated emotional compromise unfitting of the throne. Under Pack law, I am authorized to assume temporary command of royal proceedings." He didn't even look at Ernest when he said it. He looked at the guards. His guards, the ones who had quietly repositioned themselves around me and carry over the last 20 minutes, moved in unison. Everything happened fast after that. Ernest was on his feet before the first guard reached us, placing himself between them, and Carrie with a physicality that had nothing ceremonial about it. 2 guards stumbled back. A third didn't. The yard fractured into noise, shouting, the scrape of boots on stone, court officials scattering from the platform. I felt Ernest Wolf before I saw it. That pressure in the air, that particular charge, like the moment before lightning, when every hair on your arms lifts and your body understands something your mind is still catching up to. He was losing the edges of himself. And if his wolf surfaced here, unanchored, unsteady, with as many people pressing in from every direction, Thornwood would happen again. I didn't think. I sang. The old words, low and immediate, pulled from the place my mother had pressed them into me so many years ago they lived in my bones, now rather than my memory. The effect moved through Honest like a tide pulling back from shore, gradual, then sudden, then complete. His shoulders dropped, his breathing steadied, the charge in the air dissolved. The yard went silent, every face turned toward me, not toward Varric, not toward the king, toward me, kneeling in chains, singing words most of them had never heard, with a 6-year-old pressed against my side and the truth written plainly enough across the moment that even the crowd could read it now. Varric's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough. He had built his entire plan around silencing me. He had not accounted for the possibility that my voice was precisely the thing that couldn't be silenced. Varric didn't surrender dramatically. That would have required him to be the kind of man who felt things dramatically. Instead, he went quiet, that particular, calculated quiet of someone reassessing odds, as the crowd's energy shifted around him like a tide changing direction. It didn't shift because of Ernest's authority. It shifted because of mine. The song had done what Varric's entire conspiracy never anticipated. It had made the truth visible, not just to Ernest, to everyone standing in that yard. The Moonhealer ability wasn't myth to the older wolves in the crowd. They knew what it meant. They knew what it cost. And they knew that the woman currently kneeling in chains had just used it to stabilize their king rather than let him fall. That is not what traitors do. Ernest's most loyal commander arrested Varric before he could reach the gate. The evidence unraveled quickly after that. It always does when the architecture of a lie loses its foundation. War records tampered with. Witness testimonies purchased. An execution order forged and filtered through channels designed to keep the king's hands clean and his memory conveniently distant from Thornwood. The conspiracy laid out simply: control the throne by eliminating the one person whose child carried a legitimate claim to it. Carrie, who had stayed pressed against my side through all of it, looked up at the herald reading the official clearance of my charges and asked in a loud whisper whether we could go home now. The crowd laughed. It was the first real sound the yard had made all morning. Honest approached us after, without ceremony, without the weight of the throne arranged around his shoulders. Just a man crossing a yard toward the 2 people his wolf had already decided were his. He didn't ask for anything. He crouched in front of Carrie first, it felt right that he did, and then looked at me with those silver-gray eyes that had haunted 5 years of my life. "I won't ask you to forgive what you're not ready to forgive," he said quietly. I'm asking for time, and the chance to be honest about everything I've forgotten and everything I haven't. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Thornwood, about 5 years of silence and survival, and a child I had raised alone with his eyes and his stubbornness, and his infuriating tendency to make decisions before consulting anyone else. Time, I said finally. We'll start with that. Carrie reached up and took both our hands. Neither of us had asked her to. She simply decided, the way she always decides things, that it was the right thing to do and that the adults were taking too long getting there on their own. The fortress gates opened ahead of us, not triumphantly, not with fanfare or proclamation, or the performance of a kingdom reborn. Just open, pale morning light coming through, the world on the other side still existing, still continuing, still full of things that would need to be faced and rebuilt and reckoned with. A broken king, a guarded woman, and a fearless child stepped forward together, not as a legend reborn, just as a family, fragile and complicated and true, finally beginning. And sometimes beginning is enough.